Imagine a place where being an average guy makes you a October 10th, where your dad bod isn't a liability, it's a competitive advantage, where showing up sober to a date puts you in the top percentile of eligible bachelors. Welcome to Belarus, where the gender ratio is so skewed that mathematically speaking, you're somebody's type by default. Wait, but before we dive into this absolute madness, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button. Seriously, because what I'm about to show you about Belarus is just the tip of the iceberg, and episode 2 is going to blow your mind even harder. We're talking about a country that exists in a twilight zone between Europe and Russia, where the rules of reality seem negotiable. So subscribe, turn on notifications, because trust me fam is about to take you places geography class never did. Now let's get into it. So here's the thing about Belarus that nobody talks about. There are 86 men for every 100 women. Let that marinate for a second. For every 100 women walking around Minsk, there are only 86 dudes. That's a 14% shortage. In a country of 9.2 million people, we're talking about roughly 400,000 more women than men. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's interesting but not that wild. Wrong. Because unlike places like Russia or Ukraine where similar imbalances exist, Belarus has this perfect storm of factors that make the situation absolutely bananas. First, let's talk about World War II. Belarus lost about 25% of its entire population during the war. 1 in 4 people. Gone. The Nazis basically used Belarus as a highway between Germany and Russia, and it got absolutely devastated. Whole villages disappeared. The male population, specifically fighting-age men, got obliterated. But here's where it gets interesting. That was 80 years ago. Most countries recovered from their wartime gender imbalances within a generation or two. Not Belarus. Because the hits just kept coming. Fast forward to the 1990s. Soviet Union collapses. Belarus becomes independent. And while other post-Soviet countries started reforming, Belarus basically said, nah, we're good, and kept the Soviet system running with a fresh coat of paint. Enter Alexander Lukashenko in 1994, who's still president today. Same guy, for 31 years. Now, whether you think that's impressive longevity or concerning is beside the point. What matters is what happened to the male population during this time. Here's what nobody tells you about post-Soviet Belarus. The men started leaving. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic exodus. But steadily, consistently, for 3 decades. Young Belarusian men looked around and thought, I could stay here and work in a state-owned factory making $400 a month, or I could go literally anywhere else. So they went to Poland, to Germany, to Russia, to anywhere with better economic opportunities. But here's the kicker, the women stayed. Why? Because Belarus actually treats its women relatively well in terms of education and professional opportunities. Women make up about 58% of university graduates. They dominate fields like medicine, education, and law. The Soviet legacy, for all its faults, did create a culture where women working professional jobs was completely normal. So you've got educated women with decent jobs staying in Belarus, while men are bouncing to Warsaw or Moscow to make better money. The math isn't mathing in terms of relationship dynamics. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, alcoholism. Belarus has one of the highest rates of alcohol consumption in the world. We're talking 17.5 liters of pure alcohol per person per year. That's roughly 460 standard drinks annually. Per person, including children in that average. Now, who do you think is doing most of that drinking? I'll give you one guess. Belarusian men die, on average, 11 years earlier than Belarusian women. The male life expectancy is about 69 years. For women, it's 80. That's one of the largest gender gaps in life expectancy anywhere on Earth. Alcohol-related deaths, cardiovascular disease linked to drinking, accidents while intoxicated, it all adds up. And it overwhelmingly affects men. So let's do the math. War decimated the male population decades ago. Migration took educated young men out of the country. Alcoholism is taking out middle-aged men at an alarming rate. And you're left with this wild gender imbalance that just keeps perpetuating itself. Now, here's where we get into the really interesting stuff. In Minsk, the capital, if you're a reasonably employed man under 35 who doesn't have a drinking problem, you are legitimately a hot commodity. I'm not exaggerating. There are Belarusian women on dating apps who list, has a job, and doesn't drink every day as their standards. That's not a joke. That's the bar. I talked to a guy named Dmitry who moved back to Minsk from Poland after working there for 5 years. He said, and I quote, "In Warsaw, I was invisible. In Minsk, I'm basically a movie star." The man is 5 feet 7 inches, works in IT support, and has a dad bod. In Warsaw, he got maybe one match a week on dating apps. In Minsk, his phone doesn't stop buzzing. But here's the thing, and this is important. This isn't some paradise situation. This is a symptom of serious demographic and social problems. The Belarusian government is actually worried about this. The birth rate is 1.38 children per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. The population is shrinking and aging. By 2050, Belarus is projected to have lost another million people. The government has tried everything. Financial incentives for having kids. Propaganda campaigns about family values. They even have a Mother Heroine award for women who have 5 or more children. Nothing's really working. Because here's the brutal truth. You can't solve a gender imbalance and demographic crisis when your economy is stagnant, your political situation is restrictive, and your young men keep leaving or drinking themselves into early graves. Let me tell you about Svetlana. She's 32, has a master's degree in economics, works at a bank in Minsk, speaks 3 languages, and by all accounts is a catch. She's been single for 4 years. Not because she's picky, not because she's not trying, but because the available men in her age range and education level are vanishingly rare. The ones who aren't married are either leaving the country, dealing with substance issues, or have personal situations that make them incompatible. She told me something that stuck with me. In other countries, women complain about men not committing. Here, we complain about men not existing. And it's not just about romance. This gender imbalance affects the entire social fabric. Workplaces are heavily female-dominated. Go into a hospital in Belarus, it's 80% women. Schools, even more. Banks, government offices, retail, it's all skewed heavily female. This creates its own weird dynamics. There's less mentorship for young men entering professional fields because there are fewer male role models. Male-dominated spaces like construction or heavy industry become even more isolated and often more dysfunctional. And here's something wild. Domestic violence rates in Belarus are actually concerning, but underreported. Some researchers think it's partially because women feel they have to tolerate bad relationships, because the alternative is being alone in a country where single men are scarce. This isn't funny anymore. This is a legitimate social crisis hiding behind statistics that sound like a dating app's dream scenario. So why should you care about Belarus? You probably don't live there. You probably don't plan to visit. Here's why it matters. Belarus is a canary in a coal mine. This combination of war legacy, economic migration, and substance abuse creating demographic catastrophe? It's not unique to Belarus. Russia has similar issues. Parts of Ukraine. The Baltic states are seeing it. Even parts of rural America are experiencing gender imbalances due to young men leaving economically depressed areas. Belarus is just the most extreme, concentrated version of a trend that's happening in a lot of post-industrial societies. When young men can't find economic opportunity, they leave or they check out. When they leave, it creates gender imbalances. When they check out through substance abuse or withdrawal from society, it creates the same problem. And when you have gender imbalances, you get all sorts of downstream effects: falling birth rates, economic stagnation, social instability, increased mental health issues. Belarus has been dealing with this for decades, and they still haven't figured it out. The lesson here isn't, wow, dating must be easy in Belarus. The lesson is this is what happens when a country loses a generation of men and never recovers. But here's where Belarus gets even weirder. In 2020, there were massive protests against Lukashenko after a disputed election. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And you know who was at the forefront? Women. There were these images of women in white, holding flowers, standing in front of riot police. It became this international symbol of peaceful resistance. Why were women leading the protests? Partially because there were literally more of them. Partially because the government was less likely to brutally crack down on women. And partially because Belarusian women had just had enough. The protests didn't work. Lukashenko is still in power. But it showed something important. In a country with a severe gender imbalance, women don't just sit around waiting for men. They organize, they mobilize, they lead. Then in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Belarus basically became a staging ground. Russian troops launched attacks from Belarusian territory. And guess what happened? More Belarusian men left. Thousands fled to avoid being dragged into the conflict. The brain drain accelerated. The gender gap widened. The demographic crisis got worse. And through all of this, life in Belarus just kind of continues. People go to work. They date. They get married when they can. They have kids when they can afford it. The country keeps functioning, even as it's slowly hollowing out demographically. It's this weird, tragic, fascinating situation that most people don't even know exists. So yeah, Belarus. A place where being an average guy makes you statistically rare. Where the gender ratio is so skewed that it's created an entire parallel social reality. But it's not a paradise. It's a warning sign. This is what happens when war, migration, economic stagnation, and social dysfunction all pile up over decades. You get a country that's slowly disappearing, one person at a time. The men leave or die young. The women stay but struggle to build families. The birth rate crashes. The population ages and shrinks. And the cycle continues. Here's what we didn't even get to in this episode. The political repression, the surveillance state, the weird quasi-Soviet economy, the relationship with Russia, the underground culture, the surprising tech scene, and why Belarusian women are starting to leave too. That's all coming in the next episodes. And trust me, fam, it gets so much weirder. So here's what you need to do right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. Because this isn't just about Belarus. We're going to explore every country, every culture, every weird demographic and social phenomenon that nobody else is talking about. Next episode, we're diving into why the Belarusian government is so paranoid, how they track everyone, and what it's actually like to live under Europe's last dictatorship. You think this episode was wild? We're just getting started. Also, comment below, would you actually want to live in a place with a gender imbalance in your favor, knowing all the dark reasons behind it? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Until next time, I'm Trust Me Fam, reminding you that behind every weird statistic is an even weirder human story. Now go subscribe. Seriously, do it. See you next episode.